How do you change settings in your novel? My name is Nina Ellis, Dr. Nina Ellis, and I teach creative writing, English, and comparative literature here at a university in Egypt. This semester, I'm teaching a course in which we're all, including me, drafting 60,000 word novels by hand in 4 months. And these videos are your chance to follow along with us. And throughout this crazy experiment, we're using F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby as our writing guide and sort of unofficial mentor. Last week, we got up to the end of chapter 2 in The Great Gatsby, nearly to the very end, about 3 paragraphs from the end, after Nick Carraway goes to visit Daisy Buchanan and Tom Buchanan at their home and meets Jordan Baker. Today, we're going to prepare to write the next 3,000 words of our novels, inspired by the next chapter of his. I print probably an unhealthy number of sheets of paper for my students, and the thing that I printed for them this week in class 5 was this story skeleton in which I'm encouraging them to make a map of everything that they see happen in The Great Gatsby, the kind of main events on one side, and the corresponding events in their novels on the other side. And we've been talking about how we can use the structure of Fitzgerald's novel to influence the choices we're making with structure. But of course, we can diverge in lots of ways too, because this is our novel. Or I should say, these are our novels. Or this is your novel, and you don't have to do everything that Fitzgerald says. Also, you don't want to plagiarize. For example, we're going from the end of chapter 1. Nick Carraway has just got home from his dinner at the Buchanan's house, and he stands in his garden and he looks out and he notes that the wind had blown off, leaving a loud, bright night with wings beating in the trees and a persistent organ sound as the full bellows of the earth blew the frogs full of life. He sees the silhouette of a moving cat, and then he sees, 50 feet away, a figure which had emerged from the shadow of my neighbour's mansion and was standing with his hands in his pockets regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Fitzgerald's descriptions are just chef's kiss. And Nick Carraway goes on to watch him without saying anything or introducing himself. So in the Gatsby column of your story skeleton, you can write, Nick Carraway sees Gatsby but does not talk to him. And in your column, you can have a similar situation in which the narrator N sees the protagonist A but does not speak to them. And this could take all kinds of forms. They could see them from afar, they could see them at a party, they could see them on stage, whatever makes sense for your particular plotline. And that's going to be the first 300 words of the 3,000 words that you'll be writing after this class. Dedicate those 300 words to your narrator seeing the protagonist but not speaking to them. This helps to build tension, which obviously Fitzgerald has been doing ever since Gatsby's name was first mentioned. We still haven't met him, and you're going to do the same thing for your protagonist. Now, let's keep filling in our story skeleton for chapter 2, which is what will begin after this incident where the narrator sees the protagonist but doesn't talk to them. So we begin with a setting description, which brings us to the theme of this video and this class. You've probably been in one setting mainly for chapter 1, or your equivalent of chapter 1. Now you're going to leap to another setting, which creates a firm contrast with chapter 1 and the setting there. Fitzgerald does this with the Valley of Ashes, as he calls it, which is a kind of liminal in-between space where the train passes from East and West Egg, the Hamptons, on the way to New York City. There's this wonderful description that Fitzgerald opens with about the grey land, the spasms of bleak dust, and the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, which inspired the iconic cover of the first Gatsby edition. So after a section break or a chapter break, following the section where your protagonist is seen by but not spoken to by the narrator, have a setting description that establishes that we're now in quite a different setting, one that has a strong contrast with wherever you mainly were in chapter 1. After a few paragraphs of description, introduce the narrator and character C, who has persuaded the narrator to go on this journey with them. In this case, of course, it's Tom Buchanan. Fitzgerald writes, I went up to New York with Tom on the train one afternoon, and when we stopped by the ash heaps, he jumped to his feet and, taking hold of my elbow, literally forced me from the car. We're getting off, he insisted. I want you to meet my girl. And that is Myrtle Wilson, the woman with whom Tom Buchanan is having an affair. This is character E, who is in some way bound up in the secret that C, Tom Buchanan, is keeping from B, his wife, Daisy Buchanan. In your book, B and C might not be a romantic couple. They might be a brother and sister, for example, which is what they are in my novel, or friends or business partners, or some kind of other pair. But the important thing is that your character C is keeping some kind of secret from your character B, and that secret is bound up in character E. So, when your character C, like Tom Buchanan, introduces your narrator N to character E, this is an acknowledgement and revelation of the secret. Include a description of the appearance of character E and also potentially of the way they move and speak. Now we're changing setting again, which might seem surprisingly fast after being in one setting for so much of chapter 1, largely. So after about 1,000 words, or even sooner if that makes sense to you, have characters C, N, and E go somewhere else together. And again, this should be a contrast. So you move from the first setting in chapter 1, which some of my students chose to make several different settings, to a contrasting setting just now at the beginning of the equivalent of chapter 2, and to another contrasting setting for the end of chapter 2. On the journey, we should learn more about character E through her behavior or his behavior. For instance, Myrtle insists on buying a dog. And the way in which she does that, I would say, does not really reflect well on her as a person. They arrive in the new setting, in this case, the apartment that Tom Buchanan keeps for Myrtle. And Fitzgerald has a wonderful and scathing passage of setting description. The living room was crowded to the doors with a set of tapestried furniture entirely too large for it, so that to move about was to stumble continually over scenes of ladies swinging in the gardens of Versailles, and so forth. Next, Nick Carraway spends the afternoon with Myrtle and Tom and some of their friends, including Myrtle's sister, at this apartment in Manhattan. Nothing really of consequence happens in this section, except a brief mention of Gatsby by the sister of Myrtle, which helps to build tension. But the whole passage illustrates both Tom's and Myrtle's characters, and also tells us a great deal about the narrator, who's pretending not to be an important character in this story, but of course, who is a protagonist in his own way. Here's my favourite passage from that whole section in the apartment. I wanted to get out and walk eastward towards the park through the soft twilight, but each time I tried to go, I became entangled in some wild, strident argument which pulled me back, as if with ropes, into my chair. I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. So good. And the passage should end with the narrator returning to the setting that they are usually in, the setting of chapter 1. So you should be able to do that in about 3,000 words. 300 words for the beginning, where the narrator sees the protagonist but doesn't speak to them. About 1,000 for the first of the two contrasting settings, in Fitzgerald's case, the Valley of Ashes, and then about 1,700 for the next contrasting setting, so in Fitzgerald's case, the apartment. Good luck, and I'll see you for class 6. And you can follow me on social media, blah, 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 blah. Bye.